This is our time, our moment to move forward, beyond the gun violence, the hospital closures, the unaffordable housing. Brian Kemp's Georgia for the wealthiest few. Stacey Abrams is looking out for every Georgian. She'll invest our $6 billion surplus in the fundamentals, education, healthcare, housing, and a good living, putting more money in your pocket to build one Georgia where everyone has the freedom to thrive.
When we invest in ourselves, we all shine. Together, we are Black beyond measure.
We've got to stand up. Republicans are banning abortion rights, tearing down democracy, blocking progress. But when Democrats stand together, we win. Because we voted, Democrats stood up for Black lives, voting to ban police chokeholds, stood up for Black women, putting one on the Supreme Court, stood up for our families, lowering cost of health care and prescriptions and capping insulin, and stood up for millions by slashing student debt. This November, let's stand up together and keep making progress.
What up, Eddie? The Eddie C. and C. Sylvia Brown Family Foundation have generously donated to establish the Brown Lecture Series here at the Enoch Pratt Free Library. And this lecture series has been in place for several years, so we are really grateful to Eddie and Sylvia for their generosity. Events like this would not be possible without our donors. So I want to say an extra note of thanks to all the donors, especially those who are here tonight, because by having donors like yourselves, it's possible to offer these events free of charge to the public, because we want everybody to be able to benefit from all of the programs and special events of the Pratt Library. So thanks to all of you for joining us here in the Central Library. Thanks to those who are joining us by virtual programming. And I just have a few coming attractions I want to tell you about. We've got a packed schedule this fall. On November 7th, we're going to welcome back April Ryan. She's going to be discussing her new book, Black Women Will Save the World, an anthem. One Book Baltimore returns on November 10th, and this will be an encouragement to all of the Baltimore area 7th and 8th graders. The featured book is titled Furia by Jemele Hill Mendez, and she will join us for a special launch event. And then on November 17th, the Hackerman Best and Next series is back with Emmy award-winning television host W. Kamau Bell. So I encourage all of you to come back. Come back, we've got programs. The doors are open. Now it is my pleasure to introduce to you the mayor of our great city, Baltimore, Mr. Brandon Scott.
Good evening, everybody. Okay, we gotta let Jemele know where we at. We're in Baltimore. Good evening, everybody. That's more like it. Thank you, Dr. Brown, and it is my honor to join us all here in welcoming the incomparable Jemele Hill to the greatest city in America, the city of Baltimore, man. My personal, let's give her a big round of applause. I just hope Roland asks you those questions like he asked me on TV sometime. I'll be gentle. Yes, sir. My appreciation for this woman dates back many, many years. As everyone in Baltimore knows, I'm an avid sports fan, and I did not miss an episode of His and Hers, and I haven't watched SportsCenter since her and Michael left the show. But that combination of sports and hip-hop and pop culture really spoke to my spirit. That's my spirit language. And I know that I'm not alone in saying that. And I think that's why so many people relate and respect you, man. You are someone whose innovation and talent aims to bridge what divides too many people in our world. And as I told you, I don't listen to podcasts, but I do listen to Unbothered. As a fellow little brother and foreign exchange fan, of course, Fonte and Ninth Wonders episodes are my favorite, but most importantly, I think the courage and your willingness to step away from a table where you were no longer served or appreciated when it was probably easier to stay and more lucrative to stay is another reason why so many of us are in awe of your black girl magic. Lastly, I want to thank you for coming to the Pratt Library, a true jewel of Baltimore City. I'm thankful to all of our Pratt donors who helped to not only put on events like this, but for what our branches do in neighborhoods for young people and families each and every day, especially through the pandemic, where the Pratt was a partner in helping our young people learn. We know this week we found out that so many young people across our state fell back. But in many cases, Baltimore bucked the trend, and that we know is due in part to the great partnership here at the Pratt Library, and we know there will be more renovations and, dare I say it, a new Pratt Library in my neighborhood in Park Heights to come. So thank you all for being here. Thank you to Mr. and Mrs. Brown for always being fabulous stewards and supporters and the biggest cheerleaders of our great city of Baltimore, and we look forward to a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor Scott. It's now my time to introduce Ms. Jemele Hill to you, but I really am just going to piggyback on some of the things our mayor has already told us about Ms. Hill. As I understand it, her passion for writing really started at a young age, and she probably showed her great potential and her passion for writing as early as in secondary school. Currently, Ms. Jemele Hill is a contributing writer to The Atlantic magazine, and she is, as Mr. Scott tells us, she is the host of a podcast called Jemele Hill is Unbothered. Yes, she's received multiple awards. She was selected as Journalist of the Year by the National Association of Black Journalists. And Worth magazine had recognized her as one of the most powerful 21 women in their magazine in 2019. Her memoir, recently released, has already been getting a lot of attention and positive acclaim as an empowering and unabashedly bold book. Tonight, she's in conversation with Roland Martin, our host and managing editor of Roland Martin Unfiltered. So I'm going to turn the stage over to Roland Martin and to Ms. Jemele Hill, and again, thank you both for joining us tonight.
All right, glad to be here. Mic's on? We're on? I'm black, I need some bass. It's way too much treble. Brother, need some bass. All right, glad to, can y'all hear me in the back? See, now y'all can, now they can hear me. And I still need some more bass. That's way too much trouble. That's too much trouble for a brother. You got to hear us coming. All right, glad to be here. Glad that Jemele Hill wore a dress. Y'all, give it up. I just knew it was going to be tennis shoes, jeans, and a T-shirt. How many T-shirts you own?
First of all, this is why you don't ask your friends to do events like this, because then why you want to start roasting like I'm not going to?
I didn't start roasting. I just asked.
Because I knew you was going to come in here like the Princess Buddha and like,
Don't you have a line of T-shirts?
I do. I have a line of T-shirts.
Eddie, I'm trying to help her get paid, and she mad I'm talking about T-shirts. It ain't no about money.
It's true. JemelleStore.com. I have T-shirts, support black journalists. Like, obviously, the mission of Roland and I, so yes. But no, I knew I had to, dress up a little bit.
I'm just trying to sell stuff.
I got you, yes.
Like, I believe in making money.
Roland, if there's one thing about you, is like you got at least 5 hustles going at all times.
Oh.
that's why you
That's
are
right.
my boy.
That's right. Look, I done pissed off a lot of white people. I need to move to the next job. I ain't got, you know that.
I know, like.
You experienced that.
Listen, one of the reasons why I was very excited that you agreed to this conversation, you're like the busiest man in show business, number one, because you're doing an incredible job with Roland Martin Unfiltered. I'm part of the Bring the Funk crew. I donated, I'm in. Y'all need to donate to this man. And before we get into the conversation that we'll have about this book, do understand that having a black press is essential to a democracy. It's essential to the state of the press. So please, I hear us as black people, we talk about this all the time. Nobody's covering our stories. Nobody is hearing from us. Nobody cares about our perspective. Roland is on this every single day, so please support him.
So I want to start there because the thing for me, I've always understood freedom and flexibility. I've also always believed in, or not believing in, white validation. And there were a lot of people who thought you were absolutely out of your mind. They thought you should have just shut up, sucked it up, stayed at ESPN. People told you what's wrong with you.
Yeah.
How dare you leave that good-paying job? But the reality is, no matter how much they were paying you, you were actually pigeonholed, and you learned through the experience what you could and could not do. How frustrating was that? To make that money, but to be in a box.
Roland, you can relate to this story very well, but
I can't relate to what you got paid.
No, touche. Okay, I got you. But you can relate to when you're at a network that is the destination job for everybody else. So just to give you guys a little context, and it's something I definitely write about, is that ESPN was never on my vision board of jobs. My dream job was to actually work at Sports Illustrated because I was a writer by trade. That's what I do. And so Sports Illustrated was that job.
It was the New York Times of sports.
It was. And so that's where I wanted to work. And so when ESPN came across my path, I was like, oh, it's cool. They're big. They're spending money. They're investing in journalism. That is what led me there, because at the time, we're talking about 2006, and the story in newspapers, it almost feels crazy to say this now, knowing where newspapers are now, but that the end and the decline of newspapers was being strongly predicted in 2006. Ad revenue was shrinking. You can't have these two things happening at once. You have your ad revenue shrinking and your readers getting older, not younger. And so because of that, I said, once I got an opportunity to interview at ESPN for a columnist job on ESPN.com, nothing to do with television, I said, this has got to be the move to make for my future to sustain my writing career. So it wasn't like I went there with some dreams of being along the pathway of Robin Roberts or Stuart Scott. That was not what I was thinking. And eventually, moving up the ranks, fighting for real estate, going through the mechanisms of ESPN, once I got to what should have been the opportunity of a century, that's when you see all the asterisks. No question, I made generational money at ESPN, for sure. But once we started having creative differences on our show, which preceded the whole Donald Trump controversy, I knew we were not.
Sports Center show, because his and hers. Y'all had a lot more creative license.
Look, Roland, you served as my co-host.
Rock the Ascot on ESPN.
Sure
too.
did.
Had to let him know.
He represented all the way, and that's why his and hers was so special. As my former co-host Michael Smith used to say, we selling tapes out the trunk. That was our mentality. Like, we Master P in this thing, like Ice Cream Man. That's what we doing, right?
But then you get shifted to one of the flagship, and when flagship or network, that means moneymaker.
It does. I mean, it's the legacy show. It's the baby of the network. And a lot of people wonder, why would y'all move twice as much viewership, 3 times as much money, brand new studio that's worth $100 million, production staff that triples overnight, but then it comes at the expense of the say-so. All of a sudden, like, they didn't really know how foolish we were being on his and hers. It's like they knew, but they didn't know.
It was as if they didn't watch it.
They didn't, because you know what? They liked all the cool things that we did on his and hers, which were great. I mean, I drank a 40 on TV, a real 40, right? It's like we did a Coming to America skit. We did all kinds of foolish things. Like we literally just broke every television rule, and that's what made the show special.
And that's why it was a cult hit among the audience.
Yes, because we were doing that show for y'all. We were doing it for us. We were just being ourselves. We were like, listen, if don't nobody else mess with us, our people gonna mess with us. And y'all did strong. And so that's why we were able to bring in Roland Martin to co-host. Because if we tried to do that on SportsCenter, it'd be 2,000 emails about it, right? So we get to SportsCenter.
Yeah, because I'm real scary.
To them, you would have been frightening, okay? So we get into SportsCenter, and it's just a lot of cooks in the kitchen and nobody know how to make a meal. And it was a tough thing creatively to balance. And one thing that Mike and I decided early on is that if we go down, we going down our way, straight up. Like, they're never gonna be able to tell us who we are on television. Just not happening. And so when we started having that infighting and everything was happening, and then the Donald Trump thing blew up, you know, as much as this job changed my life and as big as the limelight was, I was like, I really hate doing this. Like, I'm tired of coming in every day and fighting to be myself. Like, I just can't get down like that. And so when I walked away, people have to understand that I walked away knowing that it was gonna be better for me mentally, knowing that, like, I didn't have to engage in all that silliness all the time. I did it because I wanted to. Because trust and believe, given what my contract said, they could not have ushered me out, right? And so I had the equivalent of a no trade clause that an athlete has. And I had to waive that to get up off of SportsCenter, and it was mutually beneficial because by this time, the Breitbarts, the Fox News, they were all over me and ESPN, and so it was a breakup where no one wants to be the first person to say, we don't go together no more. I was happy to say, it's over. Okay, we broke up.
And the thing that, when you talked about, again, that culture shift, that wasn't the first time that happened at ESPN. For all of the laudatory comments that they have today about our late dear brother Stuart Scott. Stuart Scott caught hell. They hated his lingo. They could not stand his language. Now, the audience changed their minds, but the reality is they preferred, and I never knew what the hell Keith Olbermann was talking about, but they preferred Keith Olbermann and Dan Patrick to Stuart Scott, and he had to battle that stuff, and that's what people don't understand behind the scenes. The stuff that I had to deal with for 6 years at CNN, people don't understand the battles that we have to deal with, and you just see us on the air. You have no idea what happened off air.
No, that's what I tell people, especially during those times, and it will happen when the network you're working for, they come into some crosshairs, right? They've done something egregious, and people assume that black people there are not fighting, and they have no idea every day it's a fight. And I'm glad you said that about Stuart Scott, who is one of the biggest supporters of Mike and I. He used to text us all the time and tell us, like, don't let them change you, you know, give us really great advice. He was like big bruh to us for sure. And in a way, while it was encouragement, it was also a warning.
Yep. And
it was a term that we phrased about SportsCenter. Like, once there was an enormous management shift while we was on there that changed how they wanted to do SportsCenter.
Well, the leader of ESPN resigned.
No, before that.
Okay.
So before the leader, John Skipper, who was the former president, before he resigned, there was another mini leadership change in terms of who was going to be in charge of our show. And we knew this person. He was also someone Stuart Scott dealt with as well, who was one of his main adversaries when he began to introduce Booyah and New Lingo and how we talk about sports.
Right.
He was the dude standing in his way. And suddenly, he's in charge of our show. And I had the feeling this was not going to go well. But I was like, okay, we'll see what happens. And ultimately, it played out just like I thought. We were the mobile quarterbacks that got the coach who only wanted a drop back passer. That's what we were. And it was very clear they did not want us. We weren't their first choice. They didn't want us. And they tried to sort of make it work. And a lot of things culturally started to happen with our show. We had a personality wall behind us on SportsCenter that was supposed to be representative of all the things that, Mike and I liked, that we thought were, really culture-shifting moments, that were personal moments. Mike had a picture of him, his wife, his kids. We had a picture of when we were all at the White House, when Obama was there, drank Hennessy in the White House. That's a great, awesome story that I will always tell. We have pictures of Biggie. We have
always black people with a Hennessy story.
Roland, don't act like you wasn't there.
But I don't drink, so I ain't got a Hennessy story.
He doesn't, but you was in the White House fooling like we were.
Come on now, in the ascot. Come on now.
So we had all these moments on the wall, the personality wall that was created for our show. And one of the first things they did was they wanted to get rid of the personality wall, not because of the picture of Biggie, not because of the picture of Mike and his kids, or me having the picture of the Detroit skyline where I'm from. It was the Obama picture that they wanted to get rid of. Because at this point, ESPN was in these crosshairs of being considered too political and too liberal, and what is going on there. And all of those chaos agents that brought that narrative about ESPN, which is they've never been polarizing, but they were during this time. And it was because the faces of the network started to change. Stephen A. Smith is becoming the face of the network. Mike and I have our own show. You have Bomani Jones, you have Sarah Spain, you have Kate Fagan.
So what y'all were experiencing, which is my new book, White Fear, how the brown
100%. And I read the book.
Their mind.
And
that's
what it is.
Faces change. Oh my God, what's going on? The world is ending. Where did all of our people go?
They couldn't handle it. And no, but it's real. Like what you're talking about is real. It's like they couldn't handle it. And even though it was very obvious that the people who were accusing ESPN of doing this were only doing that because the faces changed. It wasn't, they acted like every night on the 6 p.m. SportsCenter we were talking about immigration reform. Like we were never doing that. It was a sports show. But you have, you know how it is. It's like if they can sell a narrative about our show not being about sports, about black people being too political. One thing I learned, and I knew this beforehand, but I never really experienced this until I was doing the 6 p.m. SportsCenter. People consider you just being black and showing up on TV as being a political act. That's it.
Oh, it is.
It is to them. It's like a political act. And I'm just like, all I did was come to work and get in the employee lot. But yet I'm representing, some statement about America because, as you said, it's the fear. They see the change.
And it ain't like you had processed hair.
Yeah.
See, that you throw that in too. So no wig. You wasn't sitting here, with a flat. No, I mean that all
relaxer because it's still an integral part.
No, what I'm saying is that the reality is this. Even the idea of black women wearing natural hair or wearing braids is real new on television. Like last 2-3 years. I
mean, Mike was wearing Jordans on there. It's like he wearing Jordans. We got pictures of Biggie in the back. Like we coming in there like this the cookout. Like that's what we wanted our SportsCenter to be.
But this wasn't your first run-in with a clueless white boss.
I've had many of them.
Talk about the baby mama and how using those two words almost got you run out of Orlando.
It's true, but I'll give the kicker at the end. So one of the stories I tell in Orlando, I was a columnist for the Orlando Sentinel. It was my first columnist job. I got it when I was 28 years old. And Orlando is
first of all, the only black female sports columnist in the country.
No.
Only female.
No, the only black female sports columnist at a daily newspaper in North America, not just America.
No, but they clapping, but you were not happy.
No, because that's embarrassing. Like that's a big indictment of the profession I chose to be a part of. I was 1 out of 405, and that's why one of the chapters is named that. So I get to the Sentinel, I'm 28 years old. I have to figure out how to have a voice, how to structure a column, things, because I hadn't been a columnist before. But anyway, when I was there, I created a series called Riding With. And in Orlando, it was a different kind of sports town than I was accustomed to. When I was in Detroit, they had all the major sports. You got the Pistons, Red Wings, Tigers, Lions, unfortunately. I said that for my husband.
Well, I knew she was going to mention Lions last.
I just said that for
Her team is the 49ers, by the way.
That's right. But
she rocked everything in Detroit
but the Lions. Because I value
Lions.
my mental health, Roland. That's why. You got Michigan State. You know, it's a robust college or a robust
and we know you're
sports.
a Michigan State.
I know. Look A&M. You ain't got nothing to say.
Oh, I'm not hating, but
I'm just saying. I feel like
your season this year been like mine.
I know. We in the same boat right now.
We're in line, so we ain't gonna bring up college football.
We're a little raggedy. We won't. It's okay. We'll commune over.
We raggedy. We paying more than y'all paying mail. Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So being in Orlando. It was a one sport in terms of professionals town. They only had the Orlando Magic, that's it. So when the Magic were done and when college football season was over, because college football was very big there, because you have Florida State, Miami, all of that. And when those seasons are done, you gotta fill news hole. And so I came up with the idea to do a series called Riding With, where very simple concept. Me, a videographer, photographer, we just get in the car with an athlete, I ask him questions, we tape it, I write up the Q&A, we done. And then do one every week in the summertime, fill in that news hole. So the first one I do is with a player named Willis McGahee, who was a star in Miami. I think Willis was a second or third round pick. He suffered a very gruesome knee injury in that Miami-Ohio State game in the national championship.
Sure top 10 pick.
Oh, he was before then, and then that injury happened, and he slid a little bit, but still had a productive NFL career. Willis is the first person on the slate to interview. I go down there, have a good interview, and me, I'm, despite the fact that people like to perceive me as being very serious all the time, I'm silly. And so I'm in the car with Willis. He's got a brand new BMW. And I know he's got a couple kids by a couple different women. And I asked him jokingly, what's worse, Willis, a baby mama or ex-wife? Right? And
now, everybody black watching the video was like, excellent question, Jemele.
Yeah, exactly. I felt like I was getting to the truth of something. Willis starts going in on his baby mamas. He's like, oh, they want too much time, money. Like, he just going in. And it's funny.
Everybody black watching like, we understand, Willis.
They can relate. So he says all this. It runs. It goes viral. What was viral for 2006? It's like all these blogs pick it up. And I'm thinking this is great traffic for the site. But
then you get a call from Karen.
And then there was... There was one person who was very unhappy about this, and her name was Charlotte Hall. She was executive editor of the Orlando Sentinel at the time, and she could not believe that we put the word baby mama in print.
Does she look like us? No, I'm just checking. Look, I have to ask these questions.
That's true. No, she didn't look like us.
Because she could be a cousin of Clarence Thomas. But go right ahead, I'm sorry.
That's true. But that's a fair point, though. That's a fair point.
Oh, I can be real petty.
That's a fair point. So she did not look like us. She kind of looked like her husband might have been a founding father, but that's okay. But Charlotte was incensed. She had never heard of the term baby mama. And this is the mid-2000s.
Karen?
This is the mid-2000s. So it's very much in the lexicon of how we talk, and it's everywhere. And I said, okay. And she was like, I'm gonna put a letter in your file. I think she suspended my editor for like a day, which was crazy, just over
For baby mama?
For baby mama. She wasn't having it. So
damn Karens.
one of my bosses on the sports staff told me, he was like, listen, just make this go away. Like, I know she's overreacting, just apologize. I did not want to apologize, but I also like to eat. So I said, I will do this, but as soon as I did it, I just didn't feel good. I didn't feel right about it. And I was thinking to myself at the time, I will never again apologize for something I know I'm right about. And here's the kicker. The kicker is there was a black executive at ESPN who saw the story, because it went viral. And that same black executive, who happened to know a friend of mine, set up a meeting for me. He asked our mutual friend, which, I didn't even know we had. He asked to set up a dinner meeting in Orlando, because he's like, I want to meet the young woman who wrote that, because then I was young. And so He set up the meeting. He was like, you know, we have a sports columnist opening at ESPN.com because there's a guy named Skip Bayless who's leaving his column writing responsibilities, and he's going to be television just full time. That's it. And I'd love to bring in your voice. So what is the lesson in this? Is that one Karen's objection can lead to a come up. Is what I'm saying. So I got the job, and baby mama is how I wound up at ESPN.
So how did you leave?
So it was funny because
I know how.
Listen, Roland, you would have been.
I would have been like.
You probably would have been
like, Karen, let me holler at you. it'd have been real.
I know.
I
Real
some baby mamas in the all studio. It would have been. Let's.
I was like, Roland, I know how you get.
You gotta understand.
You would have been stepping outside this one.
I resigned a job on Juneteenth and left on July 4th. Yes, I did. I was like, freedom!
Why are you like this? Why are you like this?
It lined up perfect.
It lined up perfectly. No, I didn't leave quite like that, but here's the funny thing, another story that I tell in there. So I go off to interview, and you know, I believe in keeping it 100, so I told my bosses, I was like, hey, just so y'all know, I'm going off to interview at ESPN. So I go off to Bristol. While I'm there, the news breaks, and this is how I knew ESPN was a totally different world than what I was accustomed to. The news breaks on a sports media blog that I'm interviewing, that I had agreed to go to ESPN, and I was making $200,000 a year. I was like, that's news to me. Like, what is happening?
Wow.
While I was interviewing, that literally happened. And my manager at the time is calling me like, what is this story? And I was like, I have no idea.
I don't know, I'm still
Some op has leaked the story, but it is what it is. But, you know, long story short, I did not make $200,000 a year, by the way, much less than that. But my bosses, they understood that ESPN was the current and the future. Nobody expected me to stay at the Sentinel. I don't even think I received a counter offer because they already knew that, like, you get a chance to go to some place like that, you have to take that opportunity.
Of course.
Of course.
Karen had to get over it.
I'm sure Karen does not sweat it a day over this, but she might not.
Well, actually, what I love about the book, I love you name names. You ain't use all last names. Like, what homegirl name? What's Karen's name?
Charlotte Hall. I didn't use Charlotte
you put a whole government name in the book. But some other folk, you just use first name.
Correct.
Like when you told Henry to go F himself.
I did.
And so y'all gotta understand, okay, typically when you see these interviews, people literally sit there and just recite the whole book. I don't do that because you need to buy the damn book. Okay, so you ain't gonna get no freebie, give all the good stuff away, then you don't buy the book. No, that ain't gonna happen. Y'all gotta read the story when she said that Henry can go F himself. First of all, I hollered laughing when I got to the line. I had to go back and read it 2 more times to make sure. But again, you didn't hold back on naming names. At least my next question. Walter Mosley, I interviewed him. He came into the studio when I was in Chicago, and I don't read fiction. And I was like, Walter, I ain't read your book. He's like, what? I said, I don't read fiction, dog. And he said, well, what I love about a fiction, you can actually tell the truth more with fiction than you can with nonfiction. And he said, because you could just say, it's made up, when you're really true. He did. So when you were writing this, how did you, because you're very open about a whole bunch of stuff dealing with you, a lot of stuff with your mama and your grandmother.
Yep.
So how did you not self-censor? Or was there, or were there some things where you said, yeah, I'll put a lot, I can't put this?
I pulled a couple punches, and the reason I did is because the thing about when you write a memoir and you're naming real people, though in this case, like you mentioned Henry, and then when I talked about my abortion, I purposely did not name, I gave him a different name. Because the one thing I wanted to be very careful and intentional about is, like, I'm not gonna tell someone else's story, especially if I don't know if they've actually told this story, right? And so, you know, Henry, just so you all know, and I don't want to give away too much, as Roland said, because buy the book and read the book, but Henry was a married man that my mother was having a relationship with. And I don't know if he's still married or whatever. You know, I'm not snitching. I don't know what his situation is. All I know is
Except she said it was Henry, who owned a bunch of buildings, who was a former professional football player. I was like,
it's a lot
damn,
of people that own some buildings. Like
you unmasking like a mother.
You never know, right?
It was like he out there taking credit for me. You were like, oh, hell no.
Well, the one thing I did tell about how awkward it was is when one of his relatives reached out to me on Facebook, and I was like, your dad clearly has not, oh dang, I said who it was. I mean, anyway, they clearly have not said how they know me, but okay, anyway. It's a story for Bravo, right? I say all this to say is that the difference with a memoir is that you're writing about real people, and you have to think about what do these relationships look like after this book is done.
Right.
And so the one I was most, or the two I was most sensitive to were my mother, obviously, and to my husband, right? And because I certainly wanted to make sure that there was nothing in there that he didn't know, nothing in there that he was surprised by. Because certainly you could tell about your past and stories, but you may not go into the same detail that you would in a book.
I pull a couple of punches.
Well, or you just might not think about, do these details matter or not? You're just giving them the gist of it. So I wanted to be very cognizant of that part. But I also know, and thinking as someone who's a reader, thinking as somebody who's a journalist, and you know how much transparency is really the foundation of our profession. What would I look like considering the type of journalist I try to be, being inauthentic with the audience? So I was just gonna lay it all out there and let everybody make their own decisions and let the material do what it was supposed to do. What I wasn't gonna do is cheat people out of understanding the full scope of who I was. Because how many celebrity memoirs do you read, if you want to put me in that category, where you have the sense that they're not telling you everything? I didn't want people to leave with that when they read this book.
Absolutely, absolutely. Which I think is important because you're right, authenticity, I mean, that's actually what makes, what the artist actually wants today. Craves today, and unfortunately we have a lot of folks who don't actually do that. Looking at the things that you did talk about and growing up, how you grew up, moving different places, what your mother experienced as well, you really deal with that trauma and that pain and how it still is present today, and how a lot of folk don't take the time to really sit down and go through, okay, what did I actually go through and how is that having an impact on me today? Talk about why that is so critical, to understand your past, have a better understanding of who you are in the present and how you can be a better person in the future.
I mean, it's just like history, right? Is that the way you don't repeat it is if you actually know what happened and you understand why it happened. And a lot of us in this room are dealing with generational trauma. The only way it can be broken, I believe, is if you're very open about what that trauma is, about what's happened in your family or in your relationship, those dynamics. You have to be honest about what's going on. And once you are honest about it, you can actually address it. And we know, as in our community, what's one of the cardinal rules that we heard growing up, Roland? It was, what happens in this house stays in this house, right? Sometimes, actually not even sometimes, a lot of times, it's not good for it to stay in the house. And considering the amount of sexual abuse trauma that my mother suffered, the issues my grandmother had and other people in my family I talk about, if they had just been able to surface this in a way that they could deal with it, it would have impacted generations in our family. They didn't do that. And because of that, there was a scar and a through line that went from my grandmother to my mother right to me because of the inability to address these horrors that happened.
Like I met a woman one day and her mother was on her deathbed and her mother told her that she had dealt with depression her whole life. And her daughter was like, why in the hell didn't you say anything? She says, here I am in my 50s, and I've been dealing with this crap my entire life, and you never said a word. And she said, well, I just kept it to myself. And she said, all of these years, I've been trying to figure out what what is wrong with me? And she was angry. Just like we've had, look, that in a lot of our families, folks who have had illnesses don't say anything, and then it shows up later. In fact, I was Deion Sanders.
Yeah.
When he had his leg surgery.
Correct.
Deion almost checked out because of blood clots. It was when his mama said, "Oh, well, you know your uncle and so and so." He was like, "How in the hell all the people in the family got blood clots and nobody said anything?"
I know.
He said, "Don't y'all remember the part where they say your family history?
Your family history.
When you go to the doctor, they say, what's your family history?"
Correct.
For many of us, we leave it empty.
Oh no, because a lot of times some of the older people that we know, our elders, they have been through such pain, they don't like to speak to it. And that's why one of the things I want you all to take away from reading this book is while your people are here, ask them about their lives, even if it makes them wildly uncomfortable. And as I was writing this, of the many thoughts that I had, one of them was that how much I really miss my grandmother. My grandmother was born in 1929. I don't think I ever asked her what it was like to grow up in segregation. I don't think I ever asked her about, she told me some stories about what it was like to grow up in Kentucky. And she went from Kentucky to West Virginia, and eventually the family moved to Detroit and settled in a city just outside of Detroit called Ecorse. But I never asked her about that pathway. A
grandmother who, by the way, you're right, was brilliant.
Brilliant. She was a G. She was a big mama. And so the thing is that it was so much I didn't know. I mean, her mother, whose middle name, whose first name I have as a middle name, this made me so curious going through this journey with writing this book that, of course, I went to Ancestry. I'm looking up documents. I did not know my great-grandmother was married at 15. I had no idea. And that made me understand why when my grandmother lost her mother when she was a teenager, some of the emotional trauma she was carrying because she was still grieving and she didn't know it. Or she knew it, but there was just no time for it. Look, resiliency, resolve, all those things are great qualities. I know when people say, especially about black women, you're a strong black woman, they mean it as a compliment. The thing is, it's also debilitating.
Yep.
There are some things we are just not meant to handle.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's just some things that we shouldn't have to absorb, but we're told this time and time again. We're lauded for our strength of getting through things. Sometimes we need to sit in things to actually heal from it.
I say on my show a lot, I'm sick and tired of having, and I've had this conversation within the context of HBCUs, of our black organizations. I said, I'm tired of having surviving conversations. I said, I want to be having thriving conversations. And it's just like anytime you see these conversations where single mothers happens, and somebody brings it up, and then somebody invariably stands up. Now, wait a minute, my mama was a single mother, and blah, 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 and then folks get defensive and like, well, no, I don't really mean that. And it happened to me once. I was like, no, we're going to stay right here. I said, first of all, ask your mama if she actually wanted to be a single mama.
Exactly.
I said, you can stand here and talk to me all how your mama was strong. I said, there are very few people who have made a proactive decision, I want to raise a child alone.
I this life.
Right. I said, you can talk about how strong she was. I guarantee you, there's some times when she was in that damn room crying and in pain. I said, we got to stop sitting here letting that become the norm and deal with the reality of that ain't easy.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Roland, because I do think that for black women especially, being resilient, fighting through, taking whatever punishment people decide to give us has become the norm. That we're not defined by what we achieve, we're defined by what we withstand. And there's a difference in that. And I just realized that, with all the resiliency the women in my family have had, there was so much pain there, and I wanted to be an active part in just stopping that. Like, we got to turn the page on this. We have to be different with how we handle these things. So that was, to go back to something you asked me a couple questions ago, that was a big driving force behind writing this.
One of the things that I want to get into is the notion of fun. There are people out there who have this assumption that when you're a journalist and you're covering these major issues that you have to do this here. And I remember we were at I guess this was NABJ, may have been in Miami. You and I were twerking on stage.
Time out. This how rumors get started, Roland.
We were dancing on stage.
We were dancing. We were not twerking. You know why I know?
Let me pull a video.
Because I can't twerk.
Well, no. I didn't say you were twerking well. I didn't say you were twerking well. I just said you were twerking. I mean, there are levels to twerking. There's bad twerking, good twerking, great twerking. I didn't want to sign one. I just said you were twerking.
Listen, I'm literally Whitney Houston. I'm the black girl with no rhythm. That is me, okay?
So we're sitting there dancing, and folks were sitting there tripping on social media, and I was like, yo, you do understand it's called hashtag live life, love it.
Amen.
People act as if you have to be just locked in this persona that you cannot have fun. I keep telling them, y'all, you got one life. You got to live this thing.
Yeah.
It ain't all work.
No, well, actually, I thought what you were going to say is 2018 NABJ when I was Journalist of the Year. By the way, an award Roland won before and he's one of the OGs of NABJ. And so I remember us being on stage in Detroit as well. Roland, you always on stage. That's what the common denominator is.
Hey, look. Everybody ain't got swagger. Some folk got to be on stage. Some people got to be down there.
If Roland is on the stage at NABJ, you know the party is really jumping. And so we had a blast. But I've told people this before, is that I know people have seen me in a very serious light. They are looking at, the Donald Trump thing and all that other kind of stuff. But I'm like, I like to have fun. Like,
turn up.
I like to turn up. Like, I do a lot of the same things that a lot of other people do. But it's an important part of a release for a profession where we're constantly bombarded with sometimes the most terrifying information that we have to put into context for people.
So you asked, when I was just on your podcast, and you asked me this question, so I want you to speak to this, and that is when, in fact, it was one of the questions, too, that came here. When young journalists come up to you, and I want you to answer, you already know what my answer was on your podcast. I don't know when it's going to air, but I just went in. When young journalists come up to you and they say, Jemele, I want to do what you do. How do you respond to it?
Roland, you had an amazing answer. And when they asked me that, I said, well, there's already one me. You need to be the best you. You don't need, and sometimes what happens too is that young journalists, understandably so, they're impressed by the platform you have, by the spotlight you've been able to get, and that's, part of the journey. But I also tell them that, I love this job now just as much as I did when I was working for the Lansing State Journal and making $30
sustained
per story. Like, that's what it is. It's like, if you are only in journalism, especially for the things it can give you, you're going to be heartbroken fast.
Yeah, you ain't going to, that's not going
to work.
That was a Kobe Bryant video that was posted recently, I reposted it, where he talked about love. He said, it's the love of basketball. He said, when you love basketball, he said, that's the driving piece. And that's it. People come up to me and say, man, I see you packing gear? And I'm like, yeah, because we got to get the hell out of here. If I help pack, we can move out faster, but also I own it.
Yeah.
But the thing is, when you love your craft, you want that shot. You want that, you want to write that lead a certain way. That's the love. It ain't the money or being recognized in airports.
Roland, you know this as well as I do. Think about it, when you were first getting into journalism, what did you hear about the salaries that journalists made?
Oh, they said point blank, you're going to be making $12,000, $14,000.
It was $19,000 when I graduated.
When you graduated?
In 97.
All right, you graduated in 97. It was $19,000. I graduated in 1991. Austin American Statesman offered me $20,100. I told them, no, y'all got to pay me at least $2,000 more.
$2,000.
And I did.
Fought for that $2,000.
And they were like, and in fact, the interesting thing is, so Knight Ridder, of course, one of the big chains, Vice President Bill Baker was a great guy. He said, I really think you're going to work for our paper in Brayton in Florida. And I was like, what's your circulation? And I knew the moment he said the circulation, that was right there about 14, 15. I said, Bill, that paper too small. And he was like, I'm sorry, we're too small. I said, yeah, Bill, my skill set, that's for somebody who ain't got my skills. No, because when No, because that's going to lead to my next question, which is understanding your value.
Correct. So,
and when I got promoted 3 times in the first 18 months and went from 20,000 to 34,000, I said, Bill, I tried to tell you that was too damn small.
but you
and
know
he
what?
said, respect.
You know what, Roland, I had a similar story that I discuss obviously in the book is so the News and Observer in Raleigh was my last internship. And I went there because they had this track record of hiring interns. And it was another writer on staff who was in sports. He was like, yeah, they kept me as an intern for 11 months. I was like, 11 months? I was like, oh, hell no. I was like, I am not about to be this 11-month intern. Because they can keep you at an intern salary, which I believe was $4.19 a week. And I was like, I can't do that.
But you said you couldn't do it because you knew what your skill set was.
Correct.
And all the work you put in.
Yes.
It wasn't like you were just saying that and you were a scrub.
No, and I wasn't gonna have the I'm just happy to be in the building mentality. I said, okay, what will force their hand? So they extended my internship as I expected. And when they extended it, I said, cool, I know I'm gonna be here another 3 months. I'm going to find another job. So I started sending my clips out to everywhere else. The Savannah Morning News, they had an opening at their paper, and it was paying more than what I was making at that point. I went down there, I interviewed, really liked the people there. I was like, oh yeah, I could live here. Because if I'm gonna go chase a job, I'm gonna chase one that if it all goes to hell in negotiation, I'm going to take the job. They sent in the offer, I came back to Raleigh and I said, hey, they offering me this, y'all are still at this $21,000 a year range. And they're like, oh, they were totally shocked that I did that. And so then they came back, then the Savannah Morning News came back, and next thing you know, much like you, I did all that.
You were like, what you got?
What you got? Oh, you got
what
this?
You got? What
and
you
much
got?
like that, I did all that for an additional $3,500 in my salary.
Hey,
but
$3,500
it came in handy. But the whole point was, it was about setting a tone.
Right.
To let them know that you just can't do me any kind of way. I know my value, I know my worth, I have a different kind of skill set. And I'm sure, I thank the dude that told me that he got 11 months. I was like, man, you changed my whole perspective with that. And the other thing that happened that was very critical in that time, speaking of negotiating power, but not just knowing your worth, you also have to know your development as well. As I mentioned to y'all, Sports Illustrated was my dream job. So after I got in the job and I'm a few months into this thing, Sports Illustrated comes calling because there was a friend I'd established while I was on the road in terms of like covering women's basketball and this stuff. She saw my clip packet because what happens is when it's the NCAA tournament, all the PR people for the schools in the tournament, they put out a huge clip packet. Because if you go to a tournament, it might be 2 or 3 teams there that you've never seen play. So they put out this enormous clip packet for journalists so they can read the stories that have been written about the team all season. Some of my stories were in there that were written about a team that was, really ascending. It was the North Carolina women's basketball team. She took that, she saw those clips, loved them, and sent them to an editor at Sports Illustrated, because she worked for Sports Illustrated, and she was covering women's college basketball. Sports Illustrated called me. They had an opening to be a writer-reporter in New York working for Sports Illustrated. Now, I know this job sounds very glamorous, but here were the details of this job is that essentially you fact-check the articles that are in Sports Illustrated. And if you are if you are motivated enough, if you are driven enough, and you pitch some stories and they decide to run it and, you can report on it, maybe that could happen. So I'm looking, I've been reading Sports Illustrated for years, and I know none of those writers came from the writer-reporter track. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll go to New York. I had never been to New York City. They put me up. It's great. And I get the job. They offer me the job at the end of the interview. And the interview, I think the job was paying $42,000 a year to live in New York City. So basically, I would have been sleeping on the subway. Unless I wanted a apartment with 12 roommates, right? I was like, what? That math ain't mathin'. But it was Sports Illustrated. This is my dream job. And, I thought about it. I said, okay, let me think about it. Let me figure out what I want to do. And I'm like, let me get this straight. I'm writing basically every day at the News and Observer. I've already won the State Press Association Award for Best Sports Feature for a story I did on the Citadel's first female athlete. I am able to pretty much write what I want and whenever I want. And I have to go to Sports Illustrated. To get to Sports Illustrated, I have to fact check somebody else's stories that aren't mine. And maybe if I'm lucky, if the leprechaun is shining on me in the right way, I might get a byline in Sports Illustrated at some point. And I said, can't do it.
Right.
Cannot do it. And so I told the...
So you weren't all focused on, but Sports Illustrated.
No, because a lot of, you mentioned about younger journalists, a lot of younger journalists, and I would just say young people in period, regardless of industry, you all think bigger is always better.
Nope.
If they're not going to develop you, if what you want to do there, if you look and see who does those same things, and none of them are in the position they're trying to bring you in on, maybe you need to rethink something else. Because at ESPN, for example, there was a lot of production assistants that were really unhappy because they wanted to be on air, go somewhere making $10,000 to be on air every day, because guess what? Nobody on air right now was a production assistant. They all came from somebody else.
Hello.
Right? They all came from someplace else. So like you're just setting yourself up to fail. So I was not going to be the person up in Sports Illustrated, not writing, fact checking, just to say I was at Sports Illustrated. So I turned him down and I told him that. And I'll never forget the editor in charge of these positions told me, he said, I actually think that was a good decision. He said, we can afford you now. I have a feeling we will not be able to afford you later.
And you say you had to bounce.
And I was like, nah. So I stayed in Raleigh, and then my next job at the Free Press, I got a $25,000 pay raise. It was everything. To live in Lansing, Michigan. You know what I'm saying? I was like, that cost of living was in there.
You were balling.
I was balling.
I do love being petty.
Oh, here we go.
No. I love when there's somebody in your past who said you would not accomplish certain things, you wouldn't go so many places. You know, and I have no problem reminding those folks of that. I mean, I did hit a couple of people when I got into the NABJ Hall of Fame in December, and then Saturday when I go into the Side Professional Journalist Hall of Fame, I've hit some folk like...
Remember when you said...
No, I'm being real petty. So for you, but also it's a driving thing. If you want to understand the king of petty, watch Michael Jordan's Hall of Fame speech.
Oh, yeah.
People were mad. I was like, that's the kind of speech I'm talking about giving. So for you, is there one or two folk in your life where when you look at the stuff you're doing now with your podcast at The Atlantic and producing the stuff you're doing with LeBron, all different things, you sitting there going, I told you.
So, I mean, here's the thing. There's going to be people like that littered throughout your career, but there are a couple people that, you know, I know that especially when I got my columnist job in Orlando, that they really hated on me and hated on me to my boss on top of that. They didn't even work at the Orlando Sentinel. But I'm a deeper level than petty, because then the extra petty part of me can't even give you the acknowledgement that you did that. Because I know it would be oxygen to them, and I can't do it. So
I want them breathing.
You're like, I want them breathing the hate.
I want them breathing.
I was like, I can't do it though, Roland. It's like, my spirit will never let me platform somebody who just ain't important to me. They're just not important.
Oh no, they're not important.
Yeah. You know, I'm gonna tell you off air. When I tell you off air who it is,
see,
you gonna fall out.
See, she nice. She nice.
I
named
her.
Every time I do something in my career, I want Jeff Braun watching.
He named the first and the last. Roland, do you know his middle name? I mean,
Jeff Braun was the news director at KBTX in Bryan College Station, Texas, and I was an intern, and they had a weekend sports anchor job open up. And remember, I went to communications high school, so I'm already far above. Straight up, one of his friends came to me and said, he will not hire black men. Came to me and told me that. I was like, ain't no hell I'm staying here. And as a matter of fact, when I was on the team covering the Republican National Convention, the Austin American Statesman, I was only out of college 7 months, I ran into him. Like, what up, Jeff? Oh, bro, what are you doing here? Covering the Republican National Convention. Just graduated. So every time something happens, Jeff Braun. B-R-A-U-N.
And then give the spelling.
Still working in Dallas.
But do know this,
See,
though,
you
Roland.
put first names. When Roland writing this memoir, I'm putting middle names, last names, date of birth.
This the address, this way you can find them. But here's the thing. You know, I'm definitely one of those keep that same energy, right? So trust me when I tell you, if I saw this person in public, Roland, keep your location on because I might need bail money.
Oh, ain't no problem.
Just know that. If I see them in person,
ain't no problem.
It is on.
Oh.
Like, I'm waiting for the confrontation.
Got to text me.
I'm gonna text you. I'll be like, Roland, it's about to go down. Have your
TMZ.
wallet.
Follow Jemele at all times.
I'll do a special from jail for Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Oh, absolutely. Don't worry about it. I know enough attorney generals and DAs. You ain't gonna be spending no time in jail.
So your people gotta have your back.
That's it. Unfortunately, y'all, all they gave us was an hour. Time is up. You should get Jemele Hill's book, Uphill. It's absolutely a fascinating book. It is an easy read, and let me say, now some of y'all might, oh my, wait, easy read means in our business, writing is about rhythm. And when you read, you should be thinking the same way with music. So when you're reading a book, it's just flowing. So you can just go from one page to the next. You can knock it out in 2 or 3 days because it flows like that. And so other books like Staccato, you like, this is giving me a headache. I read a Peggy Noonan book. It took me about 3 years to finish that book.
And by the way, I would say the same about Roland's book, Wife Here, because when I had you on the podcast, I mean, I probably read that in maybe 2.5 days. Like, it was a very good read, very to the point, and most importantly now, as we are thinking about pretty much our democracy dying right in front of us, it's a very important and crucial
Absolutely, and so
I want to give your book a shout out too.
So I'm just saying, you know, Pratt, y'all can call a brother back to come back. Eddie, I mean, you got a little pull. I'm just saying, Eddie, it's your lecture series. You gave him the money. Eddie. Oh, I ain't got a problem. Just go ahead and put it out there.
I think the audience has figured it out.
Yeah, I think we figured it out there. So, all right, y'all, that is it. Put your hands together for Jemele Hill.
Thank you. You a fool, Roland.
And of course, we were live streaming this on the Black Star Network. So all the folks who are watching the network, we appreciate it. Y'all get the book as well. Available at all bookstores. And then if you run into Jemele, she can sign your book, and hopefully she'll have that person who was tripping on her. Y'all can get that good video. Thanks a lot. I'll see y'all tomorrow. Holla!